Hey, what's up, Cardfighters? So I'm actually profiling this sooner than expected. I really was hoping to like give it another run or two at my local game stores, which is shoutouts to Versus Gaming and shoutouts to House Rules Gaming. Those are the two local shops that I frequent on Mondays and Tuesdays. But yeah, I just kind of wanted to show you guys the list that I kind of brewed after my first two attempts at locals. Just trying to more or less, like, you know, cover the cracks of, like, the weaknesses of this deck, more or less. But getting onto the main deck, I'm just going to go over the Diabolos units first, because that's just the most important bread and butter part of your deck, because you need your, for VIAMANCE Bruce or Vitamin Bruce to work, you need your whole field to be Diabolos. So going on to the grade 3s, running 3 copies of Persona. Persona is actually like really, unless you already have like a full board setup, Persona is actually like really key in your deck, especially if you're not able to establish the type of back row that you do want to establish in this deck. This deck prefers playing with a full board if able, but if you're not able to play for full board, you can have just as much success playing with like more of like either an H type board or more of like an L type board, because as long as you have one column for Bruce to restand, you're gonna get the value more or less off of this card. Going on to the rest of the grade 3s, I actually went back to playing 4 copies of Julian. The reason I'm playing Julian over I'm actually not playing Jamil in the deck anymore. The reason I'm playing Julian over Jamil is just because Julian has more versatility, to whereas Jamil is a more of like a one and done type card, to whereas, ooh, that's like a little bit out of frame. Scoop and scoop. There we go. To whereas like Yamil is like more of like a one and done type card, to whereas you call it once, it can only call one thing. To whereas you could have one Julian, and depending on how long it stays on the board, it can just keep calling multiple things at once. Or if you know you're at 4 or more damage, you can call 2 things at the same time. So my reasoning for playing Julian is just because you have with one Julian, you have an easier time of building a board. Plus, it keeps its power boost regardless if your opponent is grade 3 or not. Because as you might know, this deck really pops off if your opponent's already on grade 3, because you get to final burst, and final burst like unlocks all your Bruce's abilities to get your restands off. To whereas I more or less built the deck to whereas if I happen to go first, or if my opponent makes me go first, I can still more or less play my game, or like play a little bit of like a setup turn to my turn 4, to whereas I am going to be able to final burst and like really push my opponent hard. Going on to the grade 2s, we're playing 4 copies of Eden. Eden is just like necessary in this deck, even though more and more people are playing the heal that gives you plus 15 if it has a crit. Eden is just like your win condition in this deck. Like stacking up giant power on an Eden column is more often than not how you are closing games. Or if you already have your opponent at 5, it's better to have it and not need it and not have it. But more or less, like, usually if you already have your opponent at 5, you're just trying to make, like, high power numbers, which this deck can do, like, quite easily. But Eden is just good in the early game, mid game, and late game, because he is your win condition. But at the same time, you can counter rush your opponent and punish your opponent for committing early. And counterblast in the deck is kind of weird. We're not running the counter charger, but it's more of like, it's one of those things that you just have to manage your resources correctly to get the most out of it. And I don't mind committing an Eden or 2 in the early game, and they're gonna know that like that Eden's gonna get a crit later. I gotta get that Eden off the board, or that Eden has an on-hit retire. I gotta get that Eden off the board. To whereas that's cool, dude, I only ever need 1. The reason I committed multiples early is because I probably have multiples, or I have 1 in hand, or I have 1 in soul that I can get later. Your secondary target is 4 copies of Megan. Megan is your secondary restand target / beater by itself. This is really good going first because it's just it's a solid 20k beater by itself. And, you know, like I said, if you already have your opponent at that critical 5 damage mark, then instead of restanding an Eden column, you could try and make a Megan column to restand, and you're just gonna have like a really high powered lane by itself, even without Persona Ride. Going on to the grade 1s, this is like a new addition to the deck that I've seen no other Bruceless play, which this is kind of like, this is your best booster in the deck. I'm playing 4 copies of Heidi. At first I thought this card was just like another 13k booster, and I'm just like, why do you keep printing 13k boosters? We don't need any more 13k boosters. But rereading her effect clearly, which I know it's shocking, surprise, card game players don't read. Rereading her effect clearly, she gets 5k every time she boosts. That means when you restand her with your Vitamin Bruce, she's going to get another 5k, which means she's going to be an 18k booster in total on the last attack. And I really like that, just because it makes because your win condition is essentially just like set up Heidi behind Eden, you could very easily, let's say you're going second, it's 28k on the first swing, you restand it, Bruce gives the column 10, that's going to be 38k, but then she's going to give the column another 5. That's 43k with a crit by itself, no triggers, no Persona Ride. With Persona Ride, it's going to be 53k, and then obviously with triggers, it's going to, or like any other add-on effects, it's going to be more. But I really like Heidi in this deck because it just solidifies, like, this Eden column is like, this is the threat. This is my quote-unquote win condition of the deck. And it becomes really scary when you do check a crit and you just put a crit on the other column. And now you're just like, you know, I have this swinging with a crit. You really do want to, unless you could like rush your opponent to 5, more often than not, you really do want to choke your opponent out to 4 and just threaten lethal 2 damage. But for the last grade 1s, I actually cut down on the grade 1s a lot. I'm not running as much as I used to. But for the last grade 1s, we are playing 2 copies of Stephanie. Now, I'm not playing Maple, and I'm not playing the other one. I forget her name, but she's a 10k shield as well as a 13k attacker or booster. The reason I'm not playing Maple is just because, like, so many decks are like, they just like deck thin like crazy, or they deep draw like crazy, to whereas I don't want to give my opponent a free PG just so I can get triple drive, even though that they can only use that card once. But I don't want to, because the PG, you don't have to use it on the Vanguard swing, you can use it on any swing on the turn. It can just make your most deadliest attack, which is more often than not your Eden column, like essentially like nullified, instead of like, you know, literally it's like it's a free PG. It's a free PG, there's not much to say here. But, and the reason we're not playing the other girl that's a 10 is just because Heidi is better, even though Heidi has less shield. Just, it's really crucial to this deck, at least in my personal opinion, that you do set up that Eden and Heidi column. Because, again, without any Persona Ride, it's 28 on the first swing, which is, oh, if this is an if, because not every deck runs front. The first swing, okay, cool, they can guard with a front trigger. The second swing is 43 by itself. That means if they're guarding with the oh, this attack has a crit, okay, that's 38k, which means they're going to have to expend 10k more shield out of their hand than they would have liked to, versus that probably would have just been like a 1-card guard, or like just like this and a 5k. Instead, it's that magic number of 43. But, and the reason that we're playing 2 Stephanies in the deck still, even though I do know there's a lot, especially Gandiva, I do know there's a lot of decks in the format right now that do have spot removal, that do have, like, massive board removal. That's, like, part of the reason why we are playing the Julian, just because, like, to help us refill our board very easily. I played 2 of this just because as another, it's more or less like bait as another target for your opponents to catch off guard. Because I don't really have anything too, like, good to put behind my Vanguard. All the boosters behind my Vanguard only make my Vanguard 26 by itself, 36 with Persona Ride, which they're not really bad numbers, but, you know, is nothing to really write home about either. But this can just come in really clutch in those certain matchups to where it's like your opponent necessarily can't get rid of this, and now you just have an 18k base Vanguard on your opponent's turn. Generally, all your, at least your Edens, once you reach Final Rush, your good rear guards have, like, a really good they essentially, at least for your Edens, they protect themselves because they keep the 15 for as long as you're in a final rush, which is also active on your opponent's turn as well. But let me get into like the non-engine of the deck. We're playing. This is post Festival Booster, by the way. I don't think I mentioned that in the beginning of the video. This is post Festival Booster. So we're playing one of the new Blitz OT. It's not the best in the world, but it's really the only thing that we have that's a hard combatant to the over trigger, and it's a 25k shield by itself just for a Soul Blast, which like Soul isn't that hard of a resource to generate in this deck. The only things that use your soul are your Julian and another non-engine card I'm going to get to right now. But this is really good. We were running the Chalice, but this is just way better of a defensive option. And there's just like very few defensive options in Overdress that I would just like rather have this over the quote-unquote extra Persona ride that like sometimes clogs. Getting over the rest of the non-engine, we're playing 4 copies of Lamia. The reason that we're playing this card is just because it's your best. You have space for it, and it's your best discard fodder in the deck, period. At least for your ride turns, and it can technically become a pseudo combo piece if you Persona Road. Because let's say you have something in Soul that you just need like a body. You Persona Ride, you call her out, and whatever you call, you could just basically call over her, or you call something else on top of her, to whereas by the time you hit your battle phase, you're going to have all Diabolos units on board. So you could just essentially consider her like a 1-for-1 tutor for any Diabolos that you have in your soul. But this card's really good in this deck. Like, there's times that I really kind of want a hard mull for this, but that's kind of incorrect. You really do want to keep, like, certain pieces, like your Edens, or, like, at least one Julian in your hand in the early game, just so that you're, like, it's solid that you're able to play. And that's, like, a big deterrent with this deck, is just because it really needs its rear guards to be able to play. And we're kind of, like, in a very, like, kill your rear guards format because of Gandiva. Obviously, Gandiva is this deck's worst matchup, and that's why I built it this certain way to try and combat that as best as we can. But it's, of course, I'm not gonna lie to you, it's an uphill battle. The rest of the deck, we're playing 3 copies of DPGs and one Blitz Order PG. We only play 2 Blitz Orders in this deck, so I don't think there's gonna be too much confliction for me personally. I feel like more often than not, you could just like either save this or save that, and you're not really gonna die, or like you're not really gonna miss out on a card as a card to play as defense. In my personal opinion, getting onto the Diabolos triggers, which is also very important because there are times that you either have to call triggers from Soul, or you do just have to like commit triggers from your hand just to try and push. 4 Diabolos heals. I'm not a fan of the effect heals personally. You know, I understand running the crit heal for Gandiva, but I've tried that and I've gotten like punished really hard for it. So I would just rather no guard the attack if I have to no guard the attack, or just perfect guard the attack and like go on with my day. Because a perfect guard is just like solid. This battle will not hit, like 100%. It will not hit. 4 of the Diabolos crits, and 3 of the Diabolos front triggers. I was originally running draws in the build that you guys saw me test at the 2 locals. There was a lot of times that like I just drew into the draw triggers. I just have a very bad experience with draw triggers in Dark States, but you know, that isn't going to stop me personally from just trying out various builds. But the fronts really do help, especially on turns, to whereas you can't really like build the board the way you want to. You have to play like a little bit conservatively, and the fronts just kind of make up the power that you lost because you have to play a little bit differently, to whereas, you know, obviously this deck's preference is just full board, like all game, all the time. For the rest of the triggers, 4 into Soul Crit. The only reason that we're playing the into Soul Crit is because it can disappear from the battlefield. So if you ever do need to commit this in the early game, and that's the only time I would commit this, if I really wanted to commit this, would be before I get to grade 3, before I get to Final Rush, before I get to Final Burst, is because, you know, obviously Vitamin Bruce needs all Diabolos to become Final Rush, become Final Burst. But, you know, that's the only reason why we're playing it, because it disappears. If you these just got reprinted, but if you still can't afford these, I know they're hovering around $2 to $4 a piece right now, so not necessary, but it's better to have them and not need them than to need them and not have them, is my personal saying. And then we're playing the new Overtrigger, Valnut. This is just like, Valnut? Is that really its name, Valnut? Damn, Bushiroad knew what they were doing. So we're playing the new Overtrigger, Valnut. Valnut's just really solid in this deck for, like, the reasons that I said, that, like, you really want to, like, make a column of Eden and Heidi, or Heidi and Megan, and just if you check this, it really like solidifies your win condition to where it's like, and this is actually like really good to hit in like all stages of the game, because the way that it's worded, it works no matter like what your board state is. But obviously the most ideal scenario is that you hit this after your Vanguard swing, and then you give the restand ability and the 100 million to Eden, and then you just swing 100 million twice with 2 crits. But that is the deck profile, guys. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We had a little bit of an influx, but we are steadily growing back up in our views, in our comments, likes, subscribers. So I just really wanted to thank you guys personally. Every little bit helps. Just, you know, stopping and like, hey, I really appreciate this deck profile, or hey, this is my thoughts, or hey, this is why I didn't like the deck profile. Like, even a dislike really just helps the channel and put the channel out there on the YouTube algorithm. But anyways, guys, I hope you all have a good night. Later.